Today we're going to learn how to trim a cylinder. We want to make sure that our piece is leather hard. You can test that by gently being able to push on the edge. If it pushes too much, we want to let it dry further. If it doesn't push at all, we're going to be able to trim it, but it might be difficult. So here you can see that I'm able to push it slightly, and we're ready to go. What I want to do is I want to focus on the bottom half. And just like when we centered our piece on the wheel, it's important for us to center it upside down so that way we trim everything correctly. There are a few different feet that we can place on our piece, and we're going to go through each of those step by step, one following the other. First thing I want to do is make sure that it's centered. So I take my needle tool, I get the wheel going at a slightly slow speed, enough so I don't have to stay in place forever, but not too fast so that it does fly off and get dented. Staying at 3 o'clock, I hold my needle tool, I use two hands to help support, and I slowly approach the clay. I don't want to work on down here, I just want to focus on the bottom of the pot. So I hold the needle tool steady. As it turns, I create a line. That line lets us know that we are off center in that direction. At this point, I'm going to turn off the wheel. I'm going to find that line. So as you can see, I'm able to turn the wheel. I don't want to hurt the pot. So I find the start of the line. It's very, very faint here, and it continues on to this side here, and I find where the line stops, which is right about here. So I just position myself so that way my fingers are here, and I'm going to push the clay pot away, so that way I can push it into being centered. So I'm just going to line myself up and gently push away. From here I'm going to put my hand on the bottom of the pot, and I'm going to wipe away the line so that way I don't push it any further off and I don't get confused with my line. You need to do this a few times to guarantee that you are in the center, because you may have pushed it too far or not enough. Once again, on the side here, I'm just going to take my needle tool. I try to go above or below the line that I made before, and I'm going to turn it back off. I'm going to find that line. It has started over here, so I place a finger, and it has ended over here. And once again, I'm just going to push away slightly, and I'm going to clean up that line. We'll try it one more time. And a lot of times if you haven't thrown your piece to be completely centered, this part's difficult. So if it's off just a little bit, we want to try to just make it so that it is as centered as possible. So I'm just going to go a little bit lower. As it turns, you can see the line. Turn it off. We'll find the start of the line. We'll find the stop of the line. And give it a little push. I'm happy with that. Now we want to make sure that the pot stays on the wheel. So I'm going to rip off 4 little balls of clay. And I'm going to use these to help hold the piece on. Placing my hand on the bottom of the pot, I'm going to take 1 lump of clay, and I push it up against the piece. I switch hands, and I come over to this side here. But you want to make sure that the clay isn't too soft, so that way it is easy to be moved, because if it is easy to be moved, then it might not support your piece. And you want to make sure that the clay itself is not too firm, because if it is too firm, it's not going to stick to the bat or the pot. So I turn here again, and I push it up against. You just need to kind of hold the piece in place. You don't need to push all the way up high. We're just holding it on. After we've secured it to the piece and the bat, we want to give it a wiggle test. If it moves, make the correction by holding your piece in place and just pushing the clay just a little bit tighter. If you're worried about it falling off, you can always put more clay in the opposite spots. So I'm happy with it. From here we're going to go through, we're just going to clean up our edge. I like to use a laminated card. There's a wood side and there's a laminated side. I hold it so that the laminated side is out. It just works better that way. So we're going to get our wheel going at a decent speed, a little faster than we were trying to center it, so that way we don't have to stay in one spot for too long. It's really important that it is stuck to it, because if it lets go, more than likely it's going to get dented, which is why I always suggest making more than one pot, because if you don't, if you mess up trimming, then you have to start all over. So holding the tool in two hands, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to clean up the outside edge. As you can see, it is coming off in ribbons, and I slowly slide my hand. Just like when throwing, my arms, my elbows are always on my knees or my lap, so that way I'm well supported. So I'm just cleaning up the outside edge, which was a little bit ragged for when we took it off the wheel head. I also want to try and flatten it. So by taking my card, using the corner in the center, and gently pushing down and sliding out to 3 o'clock, I'm able to remove any of the excess clay that might be a little bit higher than the rest. And then I slowly take it off. From here, we've at least cleaned our piece up and we've made it a little bit more finished. As you can see, when I turn it off and it stops spinning, it's just a nice smooth rounded edge. If you see any imperfections, you can use the tools to kind of clean it up a little bit further. From here, we're going to go through and we're going to create a false foot. I use my card, I determine the height of where I want my foot to be. The foot makes the piece seem a little bit more elevated and more important. It separates the body of the pot from the foot, and it just makes it seem a little more interesting. So we're going to go back to the same speed. I'm going to use my card, and I just pick a spot for the height of my foot. And I just push in towards the clay. This creates the start of the foot. And then I want to go through and remove some of this excess clay. I can use my card to go through and round it, but a lot of times my corner gets in the way. So I can switch to a different tool. This is another carving tool or trimming tool. I'm just going to line this edge up, and I'm just going to roll it down so that way we can create the body of the pot. You can always go back and take away more clay, but you can't put it back. So I always recommend just gently taking away the clay and smoothing out the profile of your piece. I noticed there was a little imperfection down here, so I'm just going to gently go through and slide it back in. If you feel as that tool is a little too large, we do have smaller trimming tools that kind of just get into the spots a little bit better. We're just shaving off the side. It's going to go a little bit lower. Alright, I can also use this to redefine where the foot is. If I don't feel as though that it is pushed in enough, I can just use this tool. And I'm just slowly trimming away more of the clay. And then I'm just fixing up the edge where the body meets the pot, or the foot. I find it important to always stop the wheel occasionally because we are removing layers of the clay, and if it gets too thin, we're not going to be able to support everything else. So if I just stop the wheel and I use my finger and I start to push, if I feel as though it doesn't have any give, I know I haven't taken away too much clay. If it does start to dent, we just want to be careful that we don't get it too thin. Next thing I want to do is I just want to round off this top edge of the foot. So I can use this tool, and I'm just slowly rounding the edge. We don't want any sharp edges because as things dry and as things get fired, the sharp spots become even sharper. So just by me taking that corner off, we've just finished our piece. So now if you were to flip this over on a table, you would see the body of the pot here, and you would see the start of the foot. We can go one step further, and we can create what's known as a true foot by removing the excess clay in the center. So I go back to my card, I get it going at a decent speed, and I go about finger thickness for the bottom of our foot, and I just create a little V. And I push down. This gives me the border, so that way I know that I need to remove the clay from the center to where the start of the foot is. I go back to my small tool because I just want to remove a little bit. And to mimic the inside of our cylinder, which is flat, I just want to start from my center and slide out and keep going back until I've lowered this, so that way we have a good definition of the foot, the bottom of the pot, and the body of the pot. So if I start in the center, then and I slowly slide to 3 o'clock, you can see how I'm able to remove some of the clay. The most important thing when trimming away the bottom of our piece is to make sure that the center of this is lower than the foot, because if you were to flip the piece upside down, if you didn't remove enough from here, you'd put it upside down and you'd give it a little spin, and it would spin like a top. You can't really drink from a spinning cup. So as I just slowly remove a small amount, because I want to make sure that my bottom isn't too thin so that when it dries it doesn't crack, I'm just going to do it one more time. Sometimes things get stuck. Just like we used our sponge to compact our piece, I'm going to use a wooden tool. It's important to dampen it slightly so that way it doesn't stick to the clay and it slides. And all I want to do is start from the center, and I'm going to slide to where the foot starts and then go back and forth. I just want to compact the clay to make it a little bit stronger. So as I push, I slowly slide. You notice that my elbows are on my lap, and I'm holding the tool with 2 hands, so that way it stays good and where I want it to be. And I'm just going to go back again. Trying not to put too much pressure because I know that the bottom of this one is a little bit on the thin side, but it is still okay. One of the last things I want to do is I just want to clean up where the foot meets the pot. There was just a little sharp edge. You can roll that out. And one of the final things I do to blend in what I've trimmed with what I've thrown is I take a sponge, I dampen it slightly, I squeeze out as much moisture as I can get because the sponges hold water. And now I'm just going to gently soften the areas that I trimmed. You can see how it's getting a little bit wet. All I want to do is get rid of any sharp edges and get rid of any little imperfections that might have been caused by trimming, as well as blend in the areas that were trimmed with the areas that were thrown. And just place it against the bottom of the pot here. And if I don't like the little squiggles that are made, I can just add a little more water and get rid of some of those lines that are there. At this point, now that we're staring at the bottom, and we know that our bottom is lower than our foot, I'm a big fan of making sure that I put my name on my work. And then, making sure that my hands are dry, I can remove the excess clay. It's important not to have wet hands, because what's going to happen is you'll put little imperfections on the areas that you just trimmed. So this piece is ready for a handle.